They say the modern mind is dying of noise, not because the world has become louder, but because the warrior inside has forgotten how to listen. There was a time when men trained their spirit the way others trained their sword, when focus was not a trick or a tactic, but a presence, a flame that refused to be moved by chaos. In a mountain village carved by winter winds, there lived a discipline so old that even the elders feared speaking of it. A practice whispered to be older than steel, older than kings, older than the notion of self. A system hidden not in temples or scrolls, but inside a single breath, the space between two heartbeats. Those who mastered it could walk through storms without trembling. Their silence could break confusion. Their awareness could cut lies from truth with the precision of a blade. Riku was not one of them. He was clever, restless, and drowning inside his own mind, pulled apart by fears he never admitted, desires he never questioned, and a desperate need to feel worthy in a world that kept testing him. One night, after losing everything he believed made him strong, he climbed the mountain toward a master who had not spoken in 30 years, a man whose silence carried the weight of forgotten worlds. Riku came seeking focus. What he found was himself. If something in these words echoes inside you, walk with me. The path is opening. The wind at the mountain's peak struck Riku like a warning, sharp, cold, and honest. He stood before Kensho, the silent master, expecting a greeting, a lesson, a sign. But Kensho simply looked at him, eyes steady like a lantern that refused to flicker. In that stillness, Riku felt the violence of his own mind, thoughts crashing, regrets clawing, fear whispering half-truths that felt sharper than knives. Every distraction he tried to outrun followed him up the mountain. The memory of his father's disappointment, the wound of a betrayal he never spoke about, the voice that kept telling him he would never be enough. Kensho's silence didn't comfort him. It exposed him, like a cracked drawer being opened after years of hiding what lived inside. And for the first time, Riku realized the storm wasn't around him. It was him. Riku's breath trembled as he tried to steady himself, but the wind only seemed to grow colder. Kensho turned away, slowly, deliberately, as if inviting Riku to follow without a single word. And Riku did, pulled forward by a mixture of fear and curiosity. Inside the small hut at the summit, the air was heavy with incense and ash. A single bowl sat in the center, filled with blackened paper, burned ledgers, fragments of old teachings Kensho had destroyed long ago. Riku stared at them, wondering why a master would burn his own wisdom. Kensho motioned once. "Sit." Riku obeyed. Silence wrapped around him like a noose. He felt his thoughts growing louder again, each one slamming into him, forcing him to admit a truth he had avoided for years, that the chaos in his life had always been the echo of the chaos in his mind. And Kensho, without speaking, made him feel every fracture he had tried to hide. But before Riku could ask why he'd been brought here, Kensho revealed the first test, a test no warrior had passed without trembling. Kensho placed a small wooden box between them, old, scratched, sealed with a thin red thread tied in a perfect knot. Riku expected instructions, guidance, anything. But Kensho simply tapped the lid once, then inhaled slowly, deeply, with a stillness so complete it felt like the entire room bowed to it. Riku tried to imitate him, but his breath shook. His chest tightened, his mind raced. One breath, and already he was failing. Kensho opened the wooden box. Inside was nothing, only emptiness, a symbol sharper than any blade. "That is your breath," the silence seemed to say. "Empty, because you never learned to hold it." Riku inhaled again, trying to force control. But the moment he held his breath, his thoughts attacked. Memories, fears, broken promises. The face of someone he once loved but lost. And Kensho watched, measuring the war inside him. The longer Riku held the breath, the louder his mind became. His lungs burned. His pulse roared in his ears like a distant war drum. Everything in him screamed to release, to escape, to return to the familiar chaos that once felt like life. Kensho said nothing. He only lifted one finger, a quiet command. Stay. In that stretched-out moment, Riku felt something terrifying. Without movement, without noise, without distraction. His ego had nothing to hide behind. Every insecurity stood naked. Every excuse sounded thin. He finally exhaled, gasping, ashamed of how quickly he had broken. Kensho closed the empty box and wrapped the red thread around it again, as if sealing Riku's failure inside. But there was no anger in his eyes, only a verdict. If one breath breaks you, the world never needed to. That night, as Riku lay awake listening to his own heartbeat, he began to suspect that the real enemy wasn't the mountain, or fate, or other men. It was something far quieter and far closer. Kensho led Riku into a narrow stone chamber beneath the hut, a place colder than the mountain wind, lit only by a single candle trembling in the corner. At the center of the room lay a cracked wooden chair facing a wall carved with old marks. Scratch lines from those who had sat here before, some deep, some desperate. One set ending abruptly, as if the person never finished. Riku felt a chill. No one ever spoke of the fourth mark, he thought, an unsettling curiosity digging at him. Kensho placed Riku's hand on the chair, then extinguished the candle with 2 fingers. Darkness swallowed everything. Riku's breath sharpened. His pulse rose. This was the test. No sword, no guidance, no movement. Only himself and the unseen enemy waiting in the silence. In that suffocating darkness, his mind began to wake, but not as an ally. In the dark, Riku heard it. Not a sound, but a pull. The familiar itch to move, to escape, to think of anything except the truth rising inside him like a buried ghost clawing upward. This was where the unseen enemy lived, in the need to check, to reach, to distract, to run. The same force that steals a warrior's attention long before a real battle begins. Riku tried to steady his breath, but images flashed behind his eyelids. The face of someone he betrayed, the moment he lied to protect his pride, the day he pretended he was strong while breaking inside. Each memory felt like a hand gripping his throat, not attacking him, reminding him. He finally understood the horror carved into the wall. Men don't scratch marks out of fear of the dark. They scratch to avoid meeting the darkness within. And in that moment, Riku sensed something Kensho had not said aloud. The fourth mark wasn't unfinished. It was a warning. Kensho placed a wooden practice sword in Riku's hands. Light, smooth, but carved with strange markings. Some were clean lines. Others were violently slashed as if made in despair. At the hilt, a single symbol burned faintly. Jian. To reduce. Riku expected a stance, a technique, a strike. Instead, Kensho pointed toward a row of objects laid on the floor. A cracked mirror, a rusted medal, a dried flower wrapped with a frayed red thread, and a small locked drawer with no key. Cut, Kensho whispered, the first word he had spoken since Riku arrived. Riku hesitated. These objects, they were his. Each one tied to a story he thought he needed to remember. The mirror held the image he pretended to be. The medal held a victory he never truly earned. The flower held a goodbye he never accepted. And the locked drawer, he feared even touching it. Yet Kensho insisted, cut what weakens you. Riku raised the wooden sword and felt his hands tremble. The first strike landed on the mirror. It didn't shatter loudly. It sighed, collapsing into dull fragments that no longer reflected anything. Riku felt something inside him crack with it, a version of himself dying quietly on the floor. Next was the medal. His hands stalled. This was proof he wasn't a failure. the story he repeated whenever his spirit felt small. Kensho's gaze didn't soften. Riku exhaled, then sliced. The ribbon tore. The metal spun across the ground and stopped at Kensho's feet, meaningless without the story attached. The dried flower took longer. He almost couldn't do it. But when the wooden blade finally cut through the red thread, Riku realized he had been worshipping a ghost. An old love, an old pain, an old identity. Only the locked drawer remained. Kensho turned away, leaving Riku alone with it, and with the question that burned louder than fear. What if the heaviest thing, weakening you, is the one you still refuse to open? Before dawn, Kensho led Riku into the frozen forest, a place where even the wind seemed afraid to move. Snow covered the ground like untouched parchment, and the trees stood tall as if guarding an ancient secret no villager dared to approach. Kensho raised one hand. Riku stopped. No words, only stillness. The cold bit into his skin, but something else bit deeper, the realization that the forest wasn't silent. He was simply too loud to hear it. As his breath softened, sounds began to rise from the quiet. The faint crack of distant ice, a fox's careful steps beneath the branches, the heartbeat-like echo of a bird tapping on bark. Each sound felt like a message. Each vibration felt like a truth trying to introduce itself. Kensho did not look at Riku. He didn't need to. This was the moment every warrior either awakened or turned back. Riku closed his eyes, and the world expanded. Not outward, but inward. As if the silence opened a door he never noticed before. He felt the forest more than he heard it, the shift of air behind him, the soft vibration of snow settling under a distant branch. Even the faint tremor of his own heartbeat, steady, then steadier, then almost disappearing. This was Kensho's unspoken lesson. Stillness doesn't quiet the world, it sharpens it. Riku felt something stir in the distance, a presence, subtle but real. His eyes opened just as a shadow slipped between the trees. Not a threat, a test. A deer watched him with unblinking calm, then vanished with a grace that mocked noise itself. For the first time, Riku understood the depth of the ancient discipline. Awareness is a blade, and stillness is the whetstone. But Kensho was already walking deeper into the forest, toward a place Riku had never seen, and the snow there looked disturbed, as if something had been dragged into the dark. When the snow finally thawed and the sky opened into a quiet blue, Riku descended the mountain, not as the restless boy who had climbed it, but as something steadier, a man who carried stillness the way others carried weapons. The village had not changed. Children still shouted in the streets. Merchants argued over coins. Doors slammed, dogs barked, and the world moved with the same frantic pulse as before. But Riku moved differently. Where noise once invaded him, it now passed around him like wind around a stone. Where fear once seized him, he met it with a single breath, the ritual that had remade the shape of his spirit. He saw the same problems, the same chaos, the same hunger for meaning in people's eyes, but something deeper stirred inside him. A quiet knowledge that he was no longer ruled by the storm he once believed was unbreakable. Riku walked past the old well when he noticed a small boy sitting alone, fists clenched, breath shaking in quick, panicked bursts. The child reminded him of himself, before the mountain, before Kensho, before the silence that rebuilt him. Riku sat beside him without a word. The boy looked up, eyes wet with frustration. "I can't focus," he whispered. "My head won't stop shouting." Riku placed a hand on the ground, steady and patient. "Then don't fight the noise," he said softly. "Learn the breath that stands above it." He guided the boy through the ritual of one breath, slow, intentional, unbroken. The boy trembled at first, then grew still. For a moment, the world softened around them. Riku rose, watching the child's shoulders finally relax. A quiet truth rippled through him. Focus wasn't a talent he gained on the mountain. It was a shape he carved into himself, one breath at a time. And as he walked back toward the village, a subtle unease followed him, a sense that the discipline Kensho taught him was not merely ancient, but incomplete, as if one part of the ritual had never been revealed.